I'll be covering the piece Of Our New Day Begun, composed by Omar Thomas for Wind Ensemble, written in 2015, and its connection to Nella Larsen's passing. The horrific church shooting that inspired the piece paralleled the events and adversity Brian had wanted to prepare his children for. Though Irene had wanted to protect her children, our world has unfortunately remained complacent in many ways by remaining silent. Omar Thomas is a renowned composer, arranger, and educator. He has been hailed by Herbie Hancock as showing great promise as a new voice in the further development of jazz in the future. His musical offerings shift comfortably between jazz and classical idioms due to a broad exposure in multiple genres and a desire to continually push boundaries and blaze new trails. Before the esteemed and renowned career he maintains today, Thomas was born to Guyanese parents in Brooklyn, New York in 1984. He took up playing the trombone in the 4th grade and was writing original music by the 8th grade. He was exposed to a steady diet of classic soul, soca, calypso, and reggae music in his early years at home with his parents, and was drawn to the harmony and chords of jazz and R&B. He was inspired and deeply influenced by prominent jazz musicians Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn. In 2015, Thomas was asked to write a piece of music to honor the 9 victims of the mass shooting inside Mother Emanuel Church. Initially, his instinct was to decline the seemingly daunting task, but he embraced the challenge after receiving gentle encouragement from his father. Thomas stated, "The most important thing to me was that they would hear themselves and their experience coming from the stage, to note that they were seen and they were loved, and that this piece was about them." To help in achieving this sound, Thomas used the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, and instructed the choir director to leave the African-American English vernacular in place, telling them, "Don't teach the singers how to pronounce their T's and D's and how to make their vowels round, because that's not how it's supposed to be." Thomas wanted to depict a clear journey throughout the piece, stating, "I had to think about what I wanted people to go through and how I wanted them to feel at the end of the piece specifically." Located in Charleston, South Carolina, the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, often referred to as Mother Emanuel, was founded in 1817 by Reverend Morris Brown and Denmark Vesey, and is the oldest African Methodist Episcopal church in the southern United States. The church has a long history of resilience and not backing down in the face of adversity. On June 17, 2015, Mother Emanuel was targeted and attacked by a 21-year-old white supremacist. The attacker had been lit in and trusted as he attended a Bible study before he opened fire on the group, killing 9 church members and injuring a 10th. He was found to have targeted members of the church because of its history and status. Reverend Clementon Pinckney, 41, was a pastor at Mother Emanuel, as well as a married father of 2 and state senator for District 45. Cynthia Hurd, 54, was a library manager at the Charleston County Public Library, where she had worked for 31 years. Tywanza Sanders, 26, described himself as a businessman, college graduate, poet, artist, and barber who was living life where God took him. Sharonda Singleton, 45, was head coach of the girls' track and field at Goose Creek High School, as well as a speech and language pathologist at the school. Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, 49, worked as the admissions counselor at Southern Wesleyan University's Charleston Learning Center. Reverend Daniel Simmons, 74, was a retired pastor of several churches as well as a grandfather who led weekly Bible studies and helped the church establish a housing ministry as well as a hot meal program for those in need. Susan Jackson, 87, was a longtime church member who sang in the choir. Her grandson described her as a loving, giving woman with a great smile. Ethel Lance, 70, was cousin of Susan Jackson and a Charleston native who had been a member of the church for most of her life. Myra Thompson, 59, was the wife of Reverend Anthony Thompson, Diamond Life member of the Charleston Alumni Chapter of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority. Composer Notes contains notes and considerations for the conductor and performers, historical context, dedications, motivations, and reasons for composing. Composers will also discuss allusions made to other works, composition choices made to evoke certain imagery, and the sort of story they are creating within the music. The following slides will include excerpts of Thomas's notes regarding the piece. My greatest challenge in creating this work was walking the line between reverence for the victims and their families and honoring my strong, bitter feelings towards both the perpetrator and the segments of our society that continue to create people like him. I realized that the most powerful musical expression I could offer incorporated elements from both sides of that line, embracing my pain and anger while being moved by the displays of grace and forgiveness demonstrated by the victims' families. Historically, Black Americans have, in great number, turned to the church to find refuge and grounding in the most trying of times. Thus, the musical themes and ideas for Of Our New Day Begun are rooted in the Black American church tradition. Singing, stomping, and clapping are also prominent features of this work, as they have always been a mainstay of Black music traditions, and the inclusion of the tambourine in these sections is a direct nod to Black worship service. Of Our New Day Begun begins with a unison statement of a melodic cell from Lift Every Voice before suddenly giving way to ghostly bluesy chords in the horns and bassoons. This section moves to a dolorous and bitter dirge presentation of the anthem in a regularly shifting 12/8 and 6/8 meter, which grows in intensity as it offers fleeting glimmers of hope and relief answered by cries of blues-inspired licks. A maddening ostinato-driven section representing a frustration and weariness that words cannot grows into a group singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing, fueled by the stomping and clapping reminiscent of the Black church. In the latter half of the piece, the music turns hopeful, honoring the powerful display of humanity set forth by the families of the victims. There's a long and emotional decrescendo that lands on a pensive and cathartic gospel-inspired hymn song. Returning to 9/8 time, the piece comes to a rest on a unison F that grows from a very distant hum to a thunderous roar, driven forward by march-like stomping to represent the ceaseless marching of Black Americans towards equality. Earlier this year, I got the wonderful privilege to perform this piece with the Wind Symphony, and words cannot describe how emotional and powerful it is to perform it live. To help with some of the unfamiliar music terminology, I'm going to include specific time marks in my discussion posts of the moments Thomas references to in his notes. Passing takes place in the Harlem neighborhood of New York City. As we discussed previously, the 1920s saw an abundance of African-American art, music, literature, and theater flourish. During this time, we also saw the rise and explosion of the jazz style onto the scene. This is when artists that later influenced the composition style of Omar Thomas were in their prime. Artists like Duke Ellington, Dizzy Gillespie, Charlie Parker, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, Thelonious Monk, and so many more. When considering how Thomas's piece related to our course material, I immediately thought of the scene in which Irene gets upset with Brian for trying to discuss local crimes committed against Black Americans, their sons. What resonated with me was how relevant it still is to our world today. By not discussing these occurrences, we are becoming complacent as a society. To not take action is an action itself. Though I understand Irene's sentiment to an extent, I would hope she would see the state of the world today and realize why it might not be as protective to her sons as she considered it. To put this into perspective, Passing was written within the 1920s. And the tragedy that Mother Emanuel endured occurred only 8 years ago. It's these horrific tragedies that are still common, and as Brian was touching on with his kids in the novel, we're not talking about it enough. To put this into even more perspective, the images you currently see displayed on the screen are from this year, not even addressing the events that have occurred from 2015 to this year. So yes, it would be easy to pull the wool over our eyes and keep acting as if we have solved racism, but it is still a prominent part of our history that we have not properly repented for, considering the current state of our country.